Alrighty. Hello. Check, check. Hi. We're doing my usual Monday live stream, and I'm going to be doing some coding and stuff. So I've got chat open so I can see it. And I'm going to pretty much just buckle down and start doing it. So, weirdly, yesterday's plugin posting. Hey, fat neck, chalk. Oink, oink. Yeah. Hi. So, let's switch over to our coding zone. I've got my cup of coffee, but I'm going to try to go easy on that. I have to make sure I'm not feeling bad as a result of pushing too hard with all this kind of stuff. What we've got here is some of my console code, but this is not actually console 0 we're looking at. I've got sort of a library here. And I'm thinking I would like to put together an EQ section. Because, oh, interesting. When I scroll, we have crazy high bitrate. Interesting. Because when I've put together an EQ section, I can start focusing on the emulation type stuff people were interested in. I know I've got console 0 ready to come out. That's going to be cool. That is going to require me recording some more music. So I was changing guitar strings this morning. Also, I wonder why it is my gain levels are so damn quiet. Just a moment. I'm thinking again with the, oh no, that's definitely loud enough. Just fussing with the controls a little bit, making sure that I can be heard. Alrighty. So yeah, I can't see live chat. You're like right there on my screen. Oh, did I go too loud? Maybe I'm too loud now. Hit a button and kind of turn it down a little bit. Okay, the way I'm looking at things, it's not the easiest to work on, but I do have controls for this stuff, you know. What's the gain looking like? Alrighty. Let's call it that, how about? Having the right kind of tag is useful. As such, I am able to control a bunch of those things off of the computer directly. That's always fun. So yeah, what were we doing? Let's sort of scooch this over. Some things are clearly waiting around a little bit, like I've got a version of 2tape to follow up with. I don't think that's going to be a job for today. I don't feel up to it. But getting a nice start on the EQ stuff I'm going to need to do, that might be good. So last I worked on this, like this is what's inside console 0 that I've selected. Also, the averaging. Console 0 is a little bit radical, but the stuff for, analog emulations, that is going to be distinctly less radical. So, and it's probably going to use these optimizations. Now what's going on here is I've got some ways of generating sort of optimized sines, arc sines, things like that. The cosine did not work, which is a bit of a shame because that's one of the things I need to look into for the EQ. I need to be able to use a cosine in the EQ, but it needs to be accurate because of what I do with it. I'm bringing back some of the stuff that I had going on with certain previous plugins. But you'll also note I've changed it around because these approximations get you pretty close to what a sine calculation is, the way they work. There's a power factor in each step of the way. It's a higher level of power. There's a comment that I have in there, and it has to do with whether you can optimize by doing some of those multiplies and then going in and taking that and continuing from there, like doing power of 3 and then multiplying it by dry sample again and having that be power of 5 and so on. But modern processors calculate so fast with these basic math things that probably the way of optimizing them is like this, where we've got this calculation, and it's all being done on this side of the plus equals here. And it's this big complicated math formula, but if you do this, we haven't applied the change to input sample ever, so we don't need to use dry sample. So we're able to optimize it by just doing all this stuff in sort of the math sphere, rather than trying to optimize it in a more primitive way like you do for older processors. By minimizing the math but using caching variables. Because back in the day, the computers, the processors, they didn't always do the math fast enough. So you'd be caching the results of stuff. And the modern ones are so much faster at doing the math, but they don't want to be keeping extra variables around if they don't have to. So we're doing a different kind of optimization, one that's just doing all this math and not having any additional variables involved. And you'll notice another thing about it if you look closely, which is that where I got it, down here, this is what the real math for that looks like. So you're supposed to be subtracting the power of 3 divided by 6, and then adding the power of 5 divided by 120, subtracting the power of 7 divided by 5040. And this will get you closer to an accurate sine generation. And we're only looking at pretty much the first curve of it. So it very quickly starts acting like a sine and giving you only one harmonic when you distort into it. But we can also do this. And since addition and subtraction are commutative, if we know that we're taking this and then successfully adding and subtracting all these things, we can add them together and then add the sum total of them, these being the ones that are positive, and these being the ones that were negative, that were subtracted. So we add them negatively by combining them and subtracting that. And we're turning them all into the nearest possible shifting of bits. That's all multiplication factors of 2. And I've tried this, although I can also take a minute and show you how that acts, because I'm pretty sure I have that in the computer. Long sine. Should give me that. Kind of checking to make sure that my screen doesn't crash. I can make this video capture device crash by doing certain things with this processor. We'll do a little fade in. And then this is what we were working with. And we can't hear it yet because I haven't got it plugged into the speakers, plus it's just a test tone, so we don't care, but you can see the volume gradually creeping up there. Now we can hear it. There is the 1 and there is the 2 forms of calculation. We can see that we're starting to get these harmonics on the interface. We're also rattling the whole room because that was good and loud, so I'm cutting that back down again. And that is more or less what this new form of console looks like. That is this. That is the sine plus the arc sine. And it's not console 0, but it's the one to follow. Actually, let me go back in and one further thing. Seeing as this is where I left it, so here's what that does. The first 1 over 0.5 turns on the first part. And that's presumably, it's cutting it down, it's applying more of a sine shape. Whereas the second one should be applying an arc sine shape. Oh yeah, sure enough. So that looks a little bit funny, but that's a really powerful, it's taking the sine waved shape and pointing the edge. It takes the first calculation and puts it back. So let's see. We undo. If we're applying only the first one, that still looks very rounded because this is not the kind of thing that'll put a sharp edge on any of the waveforms. But then if we keep applying the same thing again, we will start to see it being a lot more rounded off. See, that's starting to get what you would get as a flat-topped wave done only using really soft sine generating qualities. And then if we do this other function, we're putting it back. That is similar to what something like Purist Console does. Purist Console being one where it's strictly a sine function. And so what we're doing is these changes partly to have a more optimized version, partly so that we don't go whole hog and do the most intense calculation of a sine you ever could when maybe we don't need to or want to. But also because we can do a sort of degenerate sine in which all these divisors are shiftings of bits. And that's not only faster, but in theory, we should be able to get a sonic benefit out of doing as much of this as possible with fewer calculations. And one of the things I was going to do, maybe it would be a good idea for me to do now. I was going to go through and count how many mathematical functions I'm doing in all of console 0 combined with, say, well, it'll be pretty exhausting counting up everything that I'm doing in console 8 full, but we could start by looking at console 0, channel and bus. I don't actually have to be in Xcode to do that. I think this old version will still be able to do this with a spacebar. So yeah, console 0 will have two controls. And we do this. We do our shifting of bits. We only have to do that once. There's an interesting side effect to how we're doing this, which is we no longer need to do control smoothing because they can't be smoothed anyway. All of our control increments are in 6 dB increments. So slowing down the control smoothing so that it can be a tiny increment each sample no longer makes any sense, so we don't bother. And we're generating our shiftings of bits up to, let's see, 12 dB boost is our maximum boost out of this. In console 0, we are taking the impossibly quiet bits of sound and gating them. Because this whole thing is based on a shifting of bits. So we're not so much worried about putting in the tiny amounts of background noise for denormals or anything like that, because to do that we would be changing the mantisses of the values, and we don't want that. We want to pass through the mantisses as much as possible. Here's what that means. Let's open Text Wrangler and get ready to note this stuff down. And we are going to not count shiftings of bits, only the calculations that change the wave, but we're going to include everything. So let's see, and of course, remember my chat is open. I can see chat, so if people ask questions, this is a good time to do it. If you catch me when I'm doing music or something, I'm not even going to be seeing chat. So now is your opportunity. So let's start. Gating doesn't change the mantissa unless the sound is already next to 0. Temp equals input sample L. Input sample L plus average AL counts as one change. Times 0.5 does not change the mantissa of that. So for each channel, and that's how I'm going to calculate it out, that is 1. This multiply is the same as the shifting of bits, so this does not count. So we've got one change, and it's the averaging for controlling aliasing. Now bear in mind, if I was to do a biquad filter on this, that would be lots of things done to change the values we're working with. But this is 1. These if statements don't count because they are only clipping to maximum input level. So we got 1. We're also going to have another one for this other aliasing suppression. And again, console 1 is, console 0 is the one where it's doing its aliasing suppression purely with averaging filters everywhere. So it's the one that must be run at 96K to get extended high end. You'll still get some of the tone of it if you're running at 44.1K, but I'm not going to switch off the averaging filters. There will be 4 of them in total for the entire chain. So if you're running at 44 or 48K, you have to be trying to make music that is extremely, extremely dull. That's the only way that's going to work. So another bold move, another forcing behavior there. Stuff that will be more like analog emulations will be a lot more lenient around stuff like that. We'll be using things like biquad filters, or if I'm able to come up with some kind of composite, I will. Let's get back into this. So we got 1, and we choose one of these based on whether we're larger or less than 0. This doesn't count, but we're going to call this 2 math operations. Or should we though? Because we're only applying it. We're getting a number, but that number is not the output. That number is sort of a second order output because we're 2.8 minus whatever it is. Let's call that 1, changing a value. And one that gives you what the value is being changed by. I'm trying to decide which counts. Okay, so if I get to count every little variable that gets used anywhere in the algorithm, then the version for, say, console 8 is going to blow up and be ridiculous and impossible. So maybe I should just pick the ones that directly change input sample. Yeah. That makes 1, so... Because here's the thing. Then we get 1, 2, 3, and our 32-bit floating point dither, which would not be the case in the double precision version, mind you, but that still counts, and we have to do it because we have just made our input sample nonlinear. We're applying this sort of sign approximation and arcsine approximation. So we do need to count that as another thing that's altering the mantissa of the sound. And every time we touch the mantissa of the sound, it is degrading to some extent. So, 3. And then we do this noise calculation, 4. And what we're going to see here we're looking at basically the same thing. All the more important for console 0 because console 0 you could conceivably end up with everything kind of offset because panning is part of your method of altering gain levels. So you might want to offset the total mix bus as well. So it has exactly the same controls. And although these calculations are different, the numbers being used are different. In particular, we get to use another shifting of bits inside the arcsine calculation, which is why it was a little hot when we applied it all by itself. Doesn't matter though, it works out just fine. I tested it to see whether it was working okay, and it turns out to be something that you can do. One of the things about this means that you have a potential output for the bus plugin can produce really high output levels. So that might wind up having uses in some way or other. You might have a limiter or something after that. I'm not sure what people are going to do. It's going to be up to you. But again, 1, application of this is 2, 3, 4. So 8 math operations for the entire chain. And if you were just doing a simple digital mix in the most optimal imaginable way, you would end up with, let's call it at least 2, unless you were mixing into a mono, in which case you might be able to get away with just 1 per channel. But this is for a full console system. This is for the saturation, anti-saturation, and so on. Let's see now. So I'm curious as to what we're going to discover with this nonsense. Let's see. Here's sub. Channel. And bus. So for the full console, you have to run through 6 plugins. Let's start to see what we're looking at. Might not be that overwhelming, but I want to look for just how many times we're applying something to our input value. So there's one just for the dithering on input. Well, actually, no, let's not apply that, because that is nothing but that's nothing but a background noise there. With console 0, I decided to gate it rather than have it fall back through to a clean noise effect, rather than what you get if you don't do that is it kind of chatters when it drops through to silence. So I see we're working with this, and then we are applying it. Let's call that 1. Then everything's undersampled, so that's interesting. So what we're going to do is ignore the undersampling, because it will give us a total number of calculations regardless. Oh, hey, Ismail Dalgatov. Well, I'm glad you like the way that stuff works out. It's just the way I do it, that's all. You know what, let's not even get into this. I'll do this on my own time. What I'm going to do instead, don't even need to remember that. That's going to be easy to remember. Let's start walking through the EQ thing I wanted to do. Because I most certainly wanted to do that. Gotta admit, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night because of putting together all of the video stuff that I do. There's I'm not sure if you'd call it that much, but ever since I started adding the little white text thingies, it becomes more labor intensive to put that stuff together. I think it is good, though. You step above the weight class of 10,000 YouTube subscribers, and the live streams I'm doing may be complete hot garbage as far as grabbing gazillions of views, but the videos there's more to see on the screen, and part of that is being able to do things like have the little white text, the commentary track going on there. I am now speculating on whether to do N2N, whether to make it be a stereo plugin or just implement it as the simplest form. knowing that I'm going to have to make the VST be stereo. Thing is, I should probably add this to my website, the ones that work as end-to-end in audio units. I don't use the audio units anymore. I use VSTs in Reaper because I get double precision processing. But when I do code them as audio units, I've got people who are working with like hypersonic audio formats where they're doing elaborate kinds of surround, so they're actively using only such plugins that can be loaded onto like an 8 or 16 channel bus. That's an argument for putting out plugins even if they don't translate directly to VST. It's an argument for putting out plugins that are end-to-end. So let us do that. Hey, Pecori. Well, I'll feel all the better when I'm finished with my live stream today. I'll just sort of curl up somewhere and die. But for now, I do know what I'm looking to do. Also, it's been kind of satisfying that I've been posting, what am I talking about? The work that I've been doing studying classic albums has involved me capturing vinyl records down to my computer and then doing some basic editing for declicking them. So I'm capturing stuff in, and then sometimes the surface noise is a little bit much for me. It's annoying. And I don't yet have a declick plugin. But what I can do is go into the editor that I'm using. I'm using Twisted Wave on the big computer, capturing into that. And then what I'm doing is search for peaks. And when I find a click, I basically select the click and then normalize it to 24 dB down. And it neatly sort of takes away the big bursts of clicky noise that are way louder than everything else. There are times when I try to just edit out the click entirely, but I often don't want to mess with the sense of timing of the track. So what I'll do is just use that normalized thing. I'm taking the noise of the click down a great deal, which also means if it's one side of it is not as loud as the other, I'm allowing that to still be passing through at the correct level, rather than, for instance, replacing it with silence, which would get rid of the click, but it would also be arguably obtrusive. And sometimes this is while honoring zero crossings or snapping to zero crossings, and sometimes I don't even want to snap to zero crossings because it's inside of some kind of bass transient. I'm getting really big bass transients out of my vinyl capture stuff these days. And it can be better to not include everything all the way up to the next zero crossing if the bass transient is so big that I'll be changing that radically. And once I've finished cleaning up the pops and clicks manually one at a time, what I will sometimes do is continue onwards and still be looking for peaks, except for then I'm looking for the peaks in the actual waveform off of the vinyl record. Because especially in those very early 80s times, one of the things I discovered was that the studio back in the day, as they changed over to SSL desks from the Trident A range, they brought in a digital mastering system really early, but it was not the same kind that you had, for instance, from Sony. They brought in this JVC mastering system. Some reports suggest that it ran at 50K rather than 44.1. So they could have been doing it as sort of video broadcast sample rate. And it was only 16 bits, but remember, here, it was only 16 bits, but remember that dawn of digital bits don't really sound the same as like modern budget bits. It's like the difference between 12 dB off of a DAW's decimator plugin and 12 dB off of a EMU SP1200. Some of the older stuff can have a really big but still kind of hollow sound out of it. And that's what I hear in albums, for instance, like Synchronicity, which is said to maybe be the first one that Lo Studio used for their switch over to that. Anyways, when I'm capturing these vinyl records to the computer, I can listen to them, I can refer to them. At some point we're going to be able to do sort of listening sessions, and I will break out all of my tricks and start putting together more, how to get this sound videos. I've been capturing stuff, getting rid of the clicks, and then what I'm doing is going in and finding the very hottest peaks in the actual track, not just the noises, not just the clicks, but in the actual tracks. There's typically, it's almost like a randomness distribution. You end up getting just a few peaks that are like a dB louder than everything else across the entire, like, this is not stuff where they had any kind of clipping or peak limiting going on. You've got like 2 peaks in the entire album that are maybe a dB and a half or 3 dB hotter than literally everything else. So what you can do is go through and take the hottest peak in the entire album and take it down 1 dB. Just select it using the 0 crossings and apply an amplify of -1 dB. Boop. That's very cleanly done, and it doesn't touch anything outside of where the peak is. And then you go and search again, and you find another peak that is between 1 dB down and the hottest that you can get. And you add an amplify of -1 dB to that peak as well. And you sort of keep on going until you're satisfied with how far you've taken just the few hottest peaks. There's going to be entire tracks on the album that are not touched by this. It's always just one track that ended up being cut to the vinyl just a hair louder than everything else. And of that one track, there's going to be just a few drum hits that are just a hair louder than everything else. And having done this, then you normalize the whole thing. And boop, then you have a vinyl capture that can be compared directly to modern digital versions that you would find, for instance, off of Spotify or whatever. And that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm looking to maybe do a little of that sort of comparison and educating. I would like to be able to communicate what's learned from that, because there's a lot to be observed from doing it. I mean, I did the Police's Synchronicity, even though it turns out that it was probably, or to hear some people tell, mixed on an SSL rather than the A range, and mixed to digital, which is fairly plain to hear. And so it's not really representative of trying to get the sound of the A-range console. But man, some of those dynamic hits are, you can really get the sound of that sort of crazy early digital stuff. And unlike anything people do these days, they were absolutely using that performance for the widest possible dynamic range. They were really doing that the way that you would need to do it if you wanted to do it properly. Because back in the day, they didn't know any differently. They weren't trying to make the vinyl record jump out of the grooves because, you couldn't. It was bad for you if you tried to maximize everything that hard. And so you wind up going from Ghost in the Machine to Synchronicity. And Ghost in the Machine has sort of that A-range kind of sound going on, and it's definitely a lot darker. It definitely has the same sound signature as like Ziggy Stardust and Station to Station and so on and so forth, the Trident A-range. You jump to Synchronicity and it's not all about the change in recording console, or mixing console rather, because all of these were recorded in various ways, but they were mixed on a particular big desk. And the sound of Synchronicity is not entirely about the sound of the SSL. It's the sound of the SSL, but it's also being presented on that old JVC 16-bit digital audio, which has like your EMU SB1200 style bigger sound than you normally get off of typical 16-bit recording, bigger sound than you got off of the Sony stuff of the day. And it's still got that digital thing going on where it's kind of empty, it's kind of hollow. And it works with the music of Synchronicity. All the stuff that they're doing with it, it kind of translates into a little bit flatter, a little bit more upfront, a little bit starker and emptier, and way more dynamic as far as the difference between the silence of the background and the loudness of the loudest peaks. And when they were recording The Police in those albums, they really nailed it as far as capturing all the peaks. That was a stated intention of the engineer at the time. And you get really, 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 really hot drum peaks off of Synchronicity. That's part of the signature of that album. So I basically demonstrated that by capturing it off the original vinyl. I'm pretty sure I can demonstrate that it sounds more dynamic and punchy off of the vinyl, which is supposedly a limited format, than you get off of what you'd get if you listen to it off of a streaming service. And let's not even get into when people are remixing these things, because usually they're getting really seriously ruined when they get remixed in modern technology. But enough about all of that for the moment. I did say I was going to do this. So I have to decide what to call the new EQ, because it will also come out. But I basically need to work out and it's a pity that the bitrate of this struggles so much, but we'll see. I'll find out whether that causes me problems for streaming. I'm looking to make a channel EQ here, and it needs to expand outwards to have all the controls that you'd get on a TG1234 console, and or all the controls that you'd get on a Trident A-range. Pretty sure for at least the A-range that means we've got two Bell EQs and some shelves. And one of the things I know to do for some of this stuff is applying Butterworth filters so I don't have a bump on the edge of the filter. And then I'm kind of making stuff I can assemble the EQ like a sort of jigsaw. You know what I mean? Like, you can assemble an EQ like a jigsaw. You can do it by taking the audio and then subtracting the top band, leaving only the middle of everything else. And then you subtract another band from that, and you subtract another band from that until they're all separated out. Then you apply gain changes or whatever else. With what I'm doing, it's going to be a saturation effect. I'm doing sine or cosine to thicken up or thin out whatever I've got. And at the levels that I get by dividing it up in this way, it will largely act like a simple gain change, but it won't sound like one because it will mean that the boosts will sound a lot thicker and fatter and more dense than you'd otherwise have. In particular, this is going to do great things for bass boosts. I should be able to get your Abbey Road / Dark Side style bass tone out of throwing a boost on in this particular way. Instead of just applying gain, we're applying saturation. So if the sound is quiet, it's going to automatically be pushed up. But then if the sound is saturated, it will just become more saturated and you get harmonics. But since it's so heavily filtered, you get harmonics that can't possibly alias. And the whole thing, it'll just work out really well. I've done this before. Then once you finish doing those things, you assemble the bands back together by adding what had been subtracted. And the idea is that if you can establish it so that if you don't have changes to the bands, you don't touch them, you pass them through, you can end up with a EQ where if you set everything to 0, it bypasses itself. It acts like you're not doing a thing to the sound. This would be because, say, you're adding an EQ, right? And it's a shelf EQ, it's a crossover frequency. And since it exists in the real world, as you apply that, you're going to have colorations, sounds that are added to the end result. You get your highs and your lows by applying this filtering and then moving on by subtracting what you filtered. You get your highs that way, for instance. Go, whoop, take the highs out. And then you move on from there and start working with what you had after you subtracted the filter from the highs. And that becomes the next thing. What that means is what you've got is now the inverse of your original filtering thing. So if you subtracted, this to make the rest of the sound, then you add it back. No matter what you did as far as the shape of the EQ, the way that it rolls off, resonances that it might have, if those resonances are also represented by the inverse resonance on the part that you left rather than the part that you took away, you add them back together and you get the original waveform back out. It's another one of those sort of simple math things. It's like how using Purist Console, you can apply the sine shape to it and then apply the arcsine shape to it and get the same thing out that you got. And when you measure the results of those things, you get a harmonic, but then when you apply the arcsine again, the harmonic goes back away again. So this would be an optimal way of handling an elaborate EQ with a bunch of controls. And the tricky part about it is how many controls I'm probably going to end up having to use. In that these, they'll often have switchable frequency ranges. That means an additional control for that. So I probably end up needing to do like 4 bands, one of them being the treble, and then there's 2 mid-range bands, and then there's the bass band. And it might need as many as that many settings for what frequency band those apply to. In particular, all the stuff I'm talking about, they absolutely have switchable mids. And they are often implemented with, and this is why I'm doing the saturation technique rather than just a amplification technique. These EQs in the real consoles often used inductors and capacitor combinations to get your mid-ranges and things. In all these really boutique consoles, like your TG1234 or your A range, they were not using like op-amp filter integrators to do their filtering. They were doing the full-on inductors and transformers and everything to make all that stuff work. All those things saturate in overdrive. So we're going to be putting together a EQ that can have the sound of that if it works right. And I have to come up with the damn name for the dumb thing. So, and I can't use console for it yet because it's not part of one of the console plugins yet. And I can't use TG1234 or A range because this should do double duty and serve fairly well for both. So I'm really up a creek as far as figuring out what to call it. After that, there's just a lot of fussing to get all that together. So I'll be doing that and everybody will leave because I'll be doing something really boring. But put the coffee down, Chris. I'll end up getting really bad heartburn if I go too bonkers with that. I've already got an EQ. And what even do I have? We're not counting these things today. Let's put them back. See, EQ is kind of similar to what I did that way, so I can't just use EQ. It's already been used. I know. I'm going to call it fat EQ because of the way that the boostings will saturate and make whatever you're adding be a little bit more upfront, be a little bit more thick, have more harmonics going on in it. That's an accurate way of describing it. We'll call it that. It'll also be a sort of marketing-friendly name. It implies the other one is not, but this should be more than the other one, so it's all good. Da-da-da. And this is in mono. So we're starting with this. God, excuse me. My apologies. We've just got averaging filters here. So what we're going to want to do is dig into, I know what I'll do. I'll make it so that I can close this other project. That's what I'll do. We've got all this stuff going on, but this is what I'm going to want to use. That's actually pretty primitive, but you know what? That's fine. And it's even representing non-stereo at the moment, so that's cool. That's the bit I had put there specifically because I was going to use it in an EQ. So we need to filter stuff into band. And let's see, so treble, cutoff between treble and mid. The mid should have, if I'm going to accurately represent where the midpoints are, there's a number of ways I could do that. One of the ways to potentially do that is really fuss. There's a bunch of things I can do. Like I could put just one crossover frequency and then generate band passes for the mids. If I do that, I can't cut them using this technology. I can only boost them, but I can boost them. But what I'm looking at is going to work better if I really isolate the sound down into separate bands. Like ideally it would be with really steep crossovers, but I'm not necessarily going to want to go with really steep crossovers. It might be better to just place the crossovers between the points where these things need to live. So I'd have treble, upper mid, lower mid, bass. And then if I was to shift lower mid up, that would also shift bass up. And if these are not really steep, because they're not going to be really steep, these are based on inductor capacitor circuits. Those aren't steep. Those aren't like parameter EQs where you can crank up the resonance super high. And it's not going to be like, for instance, Holt or the subs EQ that I did recently, which is based on Holt and can zero in an isolated harmonics. It's not going to be like that at all. So I probably don't need to worry about honoring the details of so it would be your 4 bands, but then 3 crossover points. And then maybe a high pass. I don't think anybody is going to want or need an overall low pass as just part of the EQ, but it can be useful to have the overall high pass. So maybe that would be a thing. So we're going to seek out a place where I can apply that. Let's go and find one of these. Let's try, for instance, I think Z low pass gives me what I want. Looks like it. So yeah. Biquad A, B, C, D, E, F. That will give me filters. I won't need as many of them, but I can take them anyway. Why not? We'll just make everything be about filters. Although I am disappointed. I'm missing something here. Let's open up the other one. Do you know what I'm missing? Because I know what I'm missing. See there? Enums. The way that I like doing biquad filters is with stuff being labeled correctly. So, and this is actually a stereo filter, so, well, okay. We don't want this 11 here, we want biquad total. That will give us a biquad filter that will actually work in stereo quite naturally. Speculating over just doing like that from the word go. I know I would like to have this work as end-to-end. Thing is, if I don't make it be end-to-end, I can adapt it to the VST much more directly. I am less likely to do things like build crosstalk into it, but I could monoize the deep bass on these things or affect them in that way. That might be cool. So yeah, maybe try that. I mean, a lot of this stuff I'm designing for the purposes of mixing music in stereo. I have really strong feelings about not wanting to make it be designed specifically for the purpose of mimicking classic rock musicians. I really care a great deal about that. I do not want my stuff to fall into a niche of you can only use this to mimic the sound of classic rock music. As much as I like it, as much as I refer to it for sonic characteristics, I'm also quick to notice that stuff like the heyday of drum and bass in the 90s was also running off of not only analog consoles, but also dub plates that were applying every bit as much band limiting as you got out of classic rock record pressing. So this is not just about literally trying to be Pink Floyd again. You should be able to do new forms of music using these techniques and just be able to place them in sonic spaces that weren't previously available. Oh God, excuse me. So did I remember to hit the right button? Find out. We did. We'll call it that. And then we're going to copy over what I had from this, as little of it as there was. We may not need this many biquads, that's fine. I can take them back out again if I'm not using them. Oh, high minor tabbing issue. I'm going to be very curious to find out how streams work when I'm not coding, but I'm like derping around with synthesizers and guitars and things in the studio, but absolutely not responding to chat at all because I'm very interested in responding to chat, but I'm talking until I'm stressed out of my mind. And I can probably find a way of doing better. I mean, who knows what people even want? So there's that. Copy, close. The talking while doing my thing is always a can of worms. It's a really weird situation. There's my reference. That's how the boosting and cutting gets done. I bet you I don't need as many biquad filters as that. And here's the low pass. Was this made as end-to-end? It was. Everything is being applied to left only. But we can fix that, can't we? Just start taking stuff out of the VST version. Boop. Here's our instantiation just as we needed it. I may end up needing to do that control smoothing as well. Here is more instantiation. That lives here. And we've got only 4 of these, so maybe I need to go back and take that out of the other one. So let's see, if we did A, B, and C, and D. So A is between the super highs and the high mids. B is between the high mids and the low mids. C is between the low mids and the bass. And then D would be at the bottom of the bass. We'd be filtering that and then subtracting it and then throwing it away. Or possibly doing something else with it since we'll have it. But it is doing that would give us the option of having that subsonic stuff going on and then maybe doing something with it rather than just straight up discarding it. And so hey, important thing is I needed to take out E and F because we're not doing that many biquads. And now we have it being instantiated. That stuff is just applying things. And a cute thing about Z low pass is I think it is already using Butterworth. It is already using Butterworth. See, when I look at this and it says bike reso equals 0.7071, pretty sure that's the equivalent of Butterworth filtering. It is a filtering slope where you're rolling off. You're using a biquad, so it's going a little faster than just averaging, but there's no bump as it transitions. That is what Butterworth means. It's not really so much a wiring diagram or anything like that. It is the description of what the filter does as it starts to roll off. And Butterworth means there's no bump. There's no additional boost at that point. So there we are. You know what, we can just grab this and stick it in there and see what we get. So in theory, this should be instantiating everything. Oh, I see how this is working. Or do I know? Yeah, the way this is working, it is applying the same filters to literally everything. So A, B, C, and D. How are we applying that after all? We're getting this somehow, but somehow we're able to make this work. It's this stuff up here. There's got to be a place where I'm going through and applying this. Well, you know what? Why should I care? I know I'm going to be doing these crossover frequencies independently anyway. Why should I even care? Let's not care. One thing I do care about, though, is let's get rid of some of these long doubles. Back in the day, I did this, and it turned out I don't need to, because going from float to double gets you like 16 additional bits of resolution, and then going from double to long double wastes a bunch of CPU and gets you like 2 more. So it's like 16 more or 18 more, and 16 was enough. So we don't do long double anymore. Used to. Let's take all these out. And let's start putting this together. How do we go about that? Seriously contemplating whether I want to be smoothing these. I mean, I can smooth them. In theory, if you're not applying a huge amount of filtering, you're not going to hear the result, because this is a channel EQ, so we hear the bands all together rather than hearing a super resonant band with one of them being cut off completely. That's a little frustrating, figuring out what to do about that. It's almost like it would work better for the fixed. Let's see if we can make it work at all. Always nice to see whether we can make it work at all. Won't be using that. I have now edited out something that I was going to need to refer to. Let's go and look at it from something else. Hi, you're the thing I wanted. One knob. All this messy filtering stuff. Well, I only have 45 minutes more of wrestling with it before I can be done with it for the day. Assuming I do end up being done with it for the day, I might not. Let's make one cutoff. Just one. If I can get just one to work, that'll be nice. This is going to be done differently for this. Grumpy, grumpy, grumpy. This is where I got all of the different controls. I do not like the way this is working. I am not happy with the way this is working. This is not consistent with how the original consoles worked. The original consoles had switches. We might not have switches, but making these sweepable so that they act like synthesizers is not consistent with how the original consoles were done. I don't have to make them click between functions, but all of this is a load of hot garbage. I'm not happy with it. We're going to be more like this. See how we got all this stuff in here? That's for the control smoothing. When trying to emulate filters on classic analog desks that people are specifically asking me to make it more like the classic analog desks that had switches in them. Not interested. Not interested in making it be like a synth filter at great additional cost, I might add. The way that would work, it would crunch so much CPU when we're talking about something that sits in every channel. No way. No way. That is a trade-off that needs to be made this way. Yeah, if I'm lucky, I get any of this to work. Let's see. So what needs to change here? This goes away. This is the control smoothing stuff. That brings this back again. And if I am not mistaken, this B here is part of the control smoothing stuff, and we're going to make this go away too. There. There. And that should be a filter. So now what we're going to do, although this now changes all of the quick fix. There. They lit up in blue. That means they are real variables now. And that also means the subtracting of those letters was the correct thing to do. So, woohoo. So here we are back in here. These are the control smoothed ones. This is from low pass, so this would be setting up a biquad low pass filter. Not unlike this, in fact, but rather than being movable, this is fixed. That means, rather than digging into all of this stuff, being the way that we've stacked up the synthesizer filter from this, we're looking at multiplying this several times. So let's just grab all of this. But we're not doing fix, we're doing biquad, so I need to define that out sample too. Sure looks like, well, hang on. No, we do need that to be fixed, but so the ones with A or B are the ones that need to change. I could include that bracket, but I probably don't have to. That should be fun. There wasn't any more of that anywhere else in the project, so it didn't sneakily go through and destroy something on me. Oh, I got a problem. We use fix rather than bike, so this would not work, but now it will. And we don't want this here. Let's check and see how we got this out sample, because we're reusing it over and over again. Looks like we just declared it somewhere and then used it for different things, starting with the control smoothing. But this will work just as well. And here we go. And we're going to need to do this again. B, C, D. Could have saved myself a little bit of trouble by editing these out. Meh. As usual, I am thinking of other things and not up to speed. So in here, I might as well apply the correct sliders, which I will do in a moment. Got this still to do. Alrighty, now we have 4 filters that are simple low-pass filters. They're what we'll call the crossovers between our bands, and they should all work. They're all assigned to the same control. So let's put the... Do we want to put the controls between the faders, or do we want to maybe put them at the bottom? There's a thing, because if we put the crossovers between each of the faders, well, it's accessible, but then you can't see the faders as a sort of little graphic EQ looking thing. Whereas if I don't put the crossovers between the faders, they don't have to look like a little graphic EQ looking thing. It'll be much more scattered, but all of the things relating to controls up at the highs will be up near the highs and so on. Could go either way, honestly. Maybe I could do something with labeling, where like each of the controls, it'll be like treble and upper mid-range, and then the control directly under it is the crossover position, and I call each of those just X, with maybe a suffix of kilohertz or something there to show what it does, to show where it is. But the spacing in the labeling might provide a visual break. Anywho, if I was to do that, I'd have a gain, which would be parameter 1. Looking for vol or gain. If it's fat EQ, I could call it fat treble, fat mid-range, fat so on. Maybe I'll do that. And then I want to take this. Oh, let's fuss with this a little bit though. Need to do more with that. Where's my settings? What's this look like? This has to be applied in such a way that it can be 0 or it can be, it's going to be a crossfade effect. And I'm kind of into the idea of having this many potential stages. Like 4 stages of sine, that's a lot of boost. If this is in such a way that it's, that's potentially a lot of boost. So, likewise, the cosine is a lot of cut. Well, let's burn that bridge when we come to it. How many stages? You know what? Let's only do 3, not 4. Stack of 3. See? Got a stack of 3. They're potentially really hard boosts. And we're going to do that dry-wet type effect where we start with the previous stage and then we blend in as much of the next stage as necessary, and then only start calculating the next stage if we actually need to. So if none of this is being applied, then no cosine or sine functions are being invoked. And we need to do this regardless, but it's on a filtered thing, so it's going to be much less, most likely. And here is the one, two, three stages for the cosine. And then we're trying to get our knobs in place here. So let's start with labeling them. Otherwise, they'll be really confusing. Everything sits in the middle for starters. And technically that would be subs. We will actually have it, so what I could do is just include it. Because of course that can also be a thing where I allow it to still be there, but I force it to be mono or something. Since we will have it. Also, having it there means it's a nice twist on being able to boost all of the bass a lot. You could have it there in such a way that your boosting of bass never actually boosts actual subsonic frequency in an unmanageable way, or you could have it so that it cuts the subsonic frequencies as you boost the bass. I don't know, there are many possibilities. Or we could do the cosine processing on the subs at all times. There's possible things to do. Parameter 10, there is no parameter 10. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When we're done with these, we also are going to have a perhaps a level and pan control in there as well. So there's that. Maybe that's what parameter 10 does. Four, 5, 6. Hey, full comas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 0.9. Getting a little loopy. I'm going to make a joke. There is no parameter 10. Okay. Amusement procured. Now, let's see if we can get anything to happen in the last half hour of the stream. Oh wait, we got to define the frickin' variables. What am I even doing? That's not going to work at all. That's not going to work at all. We've got to do this. We're instantiating stuff. That got right by me. Sometimes I don't know why. Some weeks I'm just completely under the weather and not able to function, and other times I'm up and at 'em. Missing something like that feels like just raw stupidity. Oh well. This now needs to be doubled a couple of times. Double needs to be undoubled, and then this needs to be changed as well. Okay. Now this becomes a set of biquad filters. I mean, technically, these should actually work. Let's find out. We might have something that actually works here. We can take these things out. Won't be needing this. Take that out. Remove the breakpoint. Didn't mean to do that. Let's see if it even builds, for starters. It won't build first off because, as usual, this version of the program does not find this stuff first time around. Let's see if it finds it the second time. It did. Let's get rid of Z low pass, being a synthesizer filter. Let's get rid of this that we copied from. Some days I hate when I can think and all I can do is sort of babble aimlessly and my words don't make any sense anymore because they have to refer to things that I'm trying to solve that don't necessarily translate into words very well. Or if they do, I'm not translating them very well. Hi. Hi, sounds. Let's fire up something like Alien Kittens and then see if we can filter everything. Hi, new plugin. Can we hear it? Yes, we can. Can we set all of these up? Oh, no, that's not what we're... These aren't doing anything. X are all doing something. Okay. Each of these should be the same filter. Let's find out. One biquad filter. 2. 3. 4. Cool. The biquads work. I quit. I'm done. No, I'm not quit. I'm not done for the day. But I may not have this up and running today. Not impossible, but I may not. And I should change some of these things. This is only within comments, but still. We want these to be crossovers. So now how do we construct this? Here's the thing. Each of these need to be different filters. But the way we make this happen is by instantiating some more variables. Kind of like this. So you see how this top one is going to be our treble filter? We make a low pass, and we can test this later. We can make sure that this works, even with this one adjustment. We make a low pass by just assigning it to outsample. Outsample is the end result of doing this filter. So what we do is like this. So let's see, what are we calling all of these? Treble, high mid, low mid, bass, and subs. So see that? We applied the filter, so the end result of it is something where the highs have been removed. But, and you know, I do have pause about this because it's possible it would be better to do it from the other direction. It's possible it would be better to do it and do the minimal processing on the bass and the most processing on the highs, because smoothness of curves is going to be more affected by irregularities from overprocessing. That said, keeping the highs the clearest and least processed aspect also has merit. I guess we can find out. We can test it out and find out. So when we do this and we apply the filter, we can get back the original sound by going input sample L plus treble L gives us the original sound back again. And we're going to do that each step of the way, and then we're going to test it. So our next one is high mids. make each of these R instead of L. Hey, Benjo. Again, same technique. Oh, what am I doing? Sending tracks to the same reverb bus but with a different pre. That's going to be routing, Pecori. That is going to be routing. If you're sending tracks to the same reverb bus with a different pre-delay for each send, that delay needs to live in the send, and then the sends get combined together into the reverb bus. That's how you'll do it. And then the reverb bus itself does not have its own pre-delay. The pre-delay lives on the tracks that are associated with the sends. That probably means sending them to a different, a bus dedicated just to applying the pre-delay. And then that bus gets sent to another bus, which is the reverb. That's how you do it. Where's my subs? Oh, here's my subs. That was wrong. No, wait, that was right, but this is wrong. Oh, I can't do that. It's going to have to be a different bus. Yeah, well, I mean, there's your problem with DAWs and things. Track counts are going to get out of control. So, see what we got here? We have now decomposed the whole thing down into chunks. Now we're going to quickly combine them back in again. Or actually, no, we'll do this lower. All right. That's basically our output anyhow. And that's how it's done. Assuming my capitalization is on point, which it might not be. Camel case. Okay, that's screwed up. I just did that wrong. I did it in the wrong place. Let's fix. Time to fix. I got confused. I killed a program. Let's see. Yep, that's looking better. Camel case with, and we're still not using these controls, but you know we soon will. Does it build? Yes, it do. Now that we've got that, what we should have now, it will still make a sound, but none of these will do anything. I have just defeated what was being applied. Now, failing that, something else is wrong. But if we place all of these, now I'm curious as to whether it sounds any different, seeing as we're doing so much with it. I don't think it sounds that different. Remember how these are applying a filter? No apparent filter anymore. And that is because all of these are being recombined into a end result. Now we've got these bands. This is how this is going to be done, but just for the now, that's what I had, right? That's what I had. So it said only to cut, not boost. Oh, we could apply what it's going to need, though. What I'm thinking about, Benjo, for that is more along the lines of recording an entire mic chain and then also recording exactly the same sound using a simple lavalier mic. That becomes a extremely tiny diaphragm condenser, but they are incredibly good at not distorting or applying any color. I've got those things. I've got like decent vocal chains and stuff, but then I've also got a lav, a little Sennheiser that I've used for coding streams where I just wear it in my lapel and I'd be able to talk just fine, but it would also be picking up the speakers and it would get a really wide range. Like that little tiny lapel mic would be picking up subsonic bass and just amazing things. And so what I'd be doing is recording both of those things and then figuring out what I needed to do as far as tone shaping was concerned to do stuff like if the upper mid-range is more up front and more focused and defined and kind of compressed on the real microphone, the fancy microphone chain, which is a large diaphragm microphone, etc. And then if I can take that and apply it to the lav so that it's doing the same basic things. Taking stuff where a tiny, very flat lavalier mic or the mic inside your laptop or whatever. I actually bought a plugin from Voxengo that is a EQ matcher, which should do a fairly decent job of showing what it's like taking those two inputs and then comparing them. Like, it should be able to see fairly quickly whether there is a general EQ shape that I could apply to a lav to make it act more like a larger mic. But then it's a matter of just like, do we distort? Do we compress? What else do I do in order to kind of get there? Not likely to be a profile in the way of the guitar sound thing, because those are much more complicated, and I think that will eat the tone. Let's get back to this, see if I can do it right. R. One thing I can hope for doing this kind of stuff is I hope like I can make it seem more approachable as you literally watch me just derping around and doing this relatively dumb stuff and still being able to do it. Then maybe you can also do it. Oh, capitalization. And we'll leave these how they are for now. Out of a sudden, these variables are not unused. They are used. And I'll have to turn them right up in order to be able to hear any of them. But we can do that. We're not getting any feedback on what the actual frequencies are, at least not yet. All of these guys got to start off as 0 because I have them as just nothing but attenuation. There is no... All right. Our low mid is between these things. Our high mid is between these things. Our treble is here. Our high mid is here, but if we shifted the crossover of this, drop it right down to subs. Interestingly, it's still giving me subs. Bass. Subs. So if we're taking bass out, and then the crossover moves up here. And these should be positioned appropriately, I think. I think it's going to work better if they're positioned appropriately. But granted that the locations of the crossovers are positioned correctly. Here's our subs. Or we can cut the highs. Less obvious, really. So much for highs. Low mids go away. Bass but not subs comes. We have a huge boost as well. That's like 3 dB plus. Very interesting. If we don't have as many subs, it's higher, but if we then take out the subs, we start getting peaks that are way bigger than that, which is interesting. If we take everything down, there's only, high mid only, low mid only, bass only. That's a better position for subs. Now if we just had bass, we might want to cross it over a little lower. Like that. Making low mid live kind of right here. High mid live it here. And then this being our treble, we've got a filter. Little bass. Turn up the highs. And this is before we apply the tone shaping stuff that it's going to have, which will be a lot more interesting. But we could take a pretty flat setting. And then if our high mid was like here, well, bear in mind you're hearing the mo for that microphone up there. This is not DI, so there's that. I'll worry about the way it sounds. Everything about it is going to be a little odd. It's not done. Yeah, you're not listening to DI. I don't know if that helps to know. Alrighty. Not too bad. Not too bad. That is a fairly decent The poor laptop's getting a little stressed out. I'm asking a lot of it doing this. It's an old machine. So then the next thing becomes translating these controls that I've got into being able to use the controls to apply either the sine function or the cosine function on what is definitely very attenuated sounds, the middle being no change at all. And then I do exactly the same thing of combining them back together again. And then we get an end result that might be something. And we'll have to see. I mean, bear in mind, I did mention about how it's possible that I need to be doing this in the opposite order. Hard to say, because like the sound of these big analog consoles, there's a real tendency to have the bass be thickened up quite a lot. It might be an acceptable behavior having them get. I got to compare them to the actual sound. I've got the recordings of analog consoles, and those are what I'm going to try to dial in, basically getting it set up so that, like, oh hey, you can boost these upper mids really big with this control. And then having done that, and I think I'm going to be moving these around. I don't like them being spaced out the way that they are. Given that I can make it so you can, say, boost the high mids a lot and they'll saturate and they'll be loud, then I need to refer to the recordings of the actual albums and figure out whether it's in the zone as far as sounding like those desk EQs. And I've noticed, you're talking about Milky. Well, the lows off of a TG 1, 2, 3, 4 on either Abbey Road or Dark Side, if they boosted them, they sounded extremely milky. So maybe I'm onto something with that. But you're not going to be able to tell from listening to it picked up off a microphone and played back over these speakers. I can kind of hear what it's doing. So far you can't. You're just hanging out with me while I code it. Or at least you were, because it is now 1 and I can go and have a bit of a lay down or something like that and see if I can't get music put together, maybe not today, for the release of Console 0, because we're getting Console 0 and that should be pretty cool. But this should be an acceptable test bed for 4-band EQ to be used on a future version of Console. And when I get it sorted out, I will let people have it as a standalone plugin. And on that note, I am going to say goodbye for the day. Chill out and do whatever I need to do to settle down. And I'm pleased that I got this crazy filtering thing working. It'll be interesting to see whether, doing critical listening, I'm able to get anything useful out of it. If not, I'll still let you have it. But this is towards a goal of trying to make it so that I can get some of these emulation things together. And it seems very common that these big old consoles would tend to have 4-band EQs. I think I'm going to have a certain amount of flexibility as far as how I organize that stuff. But on the whole, I bet it's going to come together fairly well. So, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.